Wait for it. This is what your sourdough starter does while you sleep. Maybe you want to make a sourdough starter, but you're a little bit intimidated by the scales, all the measuring. I do none of that, and I have great sourdough starter. I've made amazing bread many times, and the best thing about sourdough starter is that you can use the discard, which you'll know more about as we continue with this video, for so many recipes that are not bread. I make pancakes all the time with it. I make crackers, I make casseroles, you name it. It's not just about bread. Having a sourdough starter is the key to so many recipes. I love having it around. It's literally one of my favorite things. So trust me, by the end of this video, not only will you feel comfortable, but you will be so ready to get out there and start your starter for all the awesome baking and non-baked goods that are to come. Day 1. So this is how I make my starter. I take some flour and I pour it in a glass jar. I don't know how much I'm pouring in. You can certainly measure if you want. You could just do a half cup or a cup. I'm using organic whole wheat flour. I like the extra nutrients that a whole grain flour has for the yeast and bacteria to essentially feed and grow on. If you want to use regular old all-purpose white flour, that is totally fine. It will work. Plenty of people make their starters that way. However, if you start noticing that you're having trouble, you can go ahead and just add some sort of whole grain flour. It might give your starter the boost that it needs. Whatever flour you use, it must be unbleached. I'm using filtered water today. Make sure you use water that's not chlorinated. Watch out for chloramine also. And you don't want to use super hot water either, because that will kill off anything that's going to eventually be able to grow. I'm just going to eyeball this and make it a thick pancake batter consistency. Your starter does not have to be this consistency. Trust me. We'll get into that more later. For now, make it that consistency. If you add too much flour and it's too thick, add more water. If it's too thin, add more flour. Now I'm just going to put a loose fitting lid on top of this and leave it for 24 hours. Eventually, once this starts getting active, it will release CO2, and you don't want a bunch of pressure to build up inside your glass. So that's why you don't want to put a tightly fitting lid on. Tomorrow, in 24 hours, we're gonna discard half of this and refeed it just like we did today. We're gonna do this every 24 hours for 5 days. Now we're seeing tons of bubbles, and that means carbon dioxide is being released and the fermentation process is underway. Fewer bubbles today, but that's okay. I might have accidentally used cold water, which slows down the fermentation process, or it may be because I removed a large amount of starter and replaced it with a large amount of flour. So it may take a while for the yeast and bacteria population to grow again. On the 6th and 7th days, we're gonna feed it every 12 hours just to get it nice and active and ready for use. So that's the process. If you're new to sourdough, you might wonder why you have to discard some of your starter. The reason is, once the starter that we have here ferments, we need to feed it with enough flour to satisfy all that you have here. So if you fed it a bunch, your starter would get this big, let's say. And then next time you're gonna have to feed it that much more flour to satisfy everything you have here. So then your starter just gets exponentially bigger and it's too much to maintain. And frankly, you don't need that much. You can change the size of your starter when you're making other things, but that's the gist of it. Now you've got this great starter. How do you maintain it? Well, if you bake on a daily basis, you're gonna leave your starter out at room temperature and you're gonna feed it maybe every 24 hours. Discard and feed with flour and water. Wait till it gets nice and bubbly and active at its peak point. You're gonna bake with it. I don't bake every day, so what I do is I feed my starter, and if I know I'm not gonna need it for several days, I just throw it in the fridge. It's gonna still ferment, but at a slower rate in the fridge. Sometimes though, if I wanna make sure it gets some activity before it goes in the fridge, I'll just leave it out on the counter for a few hours, let it start fermenting, and then throw it in the fridge. I do like to make sure that my starter is about a thick pancake batter consistency. And that's because that's essentially a 100% hydration starter. It is, like I said, a good balance of fermentation activity and ease of use. It's what's used in a lot of recipes. It just means you have equal parts flour and water by weight. So if you have 50 grams of flour, you're gonna have 50 grams of water. Eyeballing it like this is what makes it more or less that hydration level. Although I've had it way thinner and way thicker, and it's still been fine. The sourness of what you make will change based on the thickness, also the length of time you ferment it. All of that stuff starts to play a role, but don't worry about it. As long as you have something that's active and bubbly, it's gonna work. And once you have a strong starter, whatever you discard, as long as you've let it sit for a little bit, is gonna be fermented. So you can use it for awesome recipes. As I mentioned before, you can make crackers with it. You can make pancakes with it. I always make sure that the discard that I'm gonna use in recipes has either fermented out on the counter or in the fridge for several days, so I get all of the benefits of the fermentation. Fermentation makes it so that discard is not gonna do a lot of the things that regular flour does to people, like with the gluten not being easy to break down. If you have your starter in the fridge for a while and you get grayish or black liquid on top, that's called hooch. Yes, I didn't make the name up. You can just stir it right back in. It is not problematic. It just means that your starter has run out of food. I think that's enough for today. I will save all of the other things that I'm dying to say for another video. I have another video about sourdough discard recipes, so check that one out. For now, just remember, this is not complicated. You're gonna fall in love with your sourdough starter. Don't buy all of that highly processed bread that can last on the shelf for 30 days. Make your own sourdough. Tastes way better, and it's fermented. It's healthier. It's fun too. Remember to eat real food. See you next time.